Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Curly's Creeping Corner. Today's story is going to be called Words I Write Onto Paper. And it's something that I myself find a little scary. I don't know how my listeners will feel about it, but I hope there is something to be gained, even if it's just a little perspective. As usual, I suggest listening to this in the quiet and dark of your room. And should you need to keep the lights on, that's okay. It keeps the monsters at bay. And we could all use a little bit of that. Let's begin. Today is the anniversary of my parents' passing. It was about 14 years ago when I was a little girl of 7 years old. We were on our way to visit my grandparents who lived just on the outskirts of town. That night it was raining dreadfully hard. Much harder than it had in the past few years. Or so I'm told. Today it is raining just as dreadfully hard, and as I look out my window while I write this, I can see those same rivers of water in the streets outside, waiting to pull in some unknowing soul. It must have been rain just like this that caused our car to spin off the road and into the tree. I awoke an orphan in the hospital bed just a few hours later, but I wasn't saddened by it. You see, one of the many branches that we flew into that night pierced itself right into the front of my skull, just above my eyes, piercing my frontal lobe. I awoke with no memory of my life from the past 7 years. I could neither remember my parents, nor my dog, the house I'd grown up in, the car we had just crashed, or even having been in that crash for that matter. Even as my grandparents made their way into the hospital room, I saw nothing but strangers trying to comfort me. Over time, my grandparents helped me to fill in the blanks of what I should remember of my childhood, but it did little to bring back my own memory. After a while, I refused to forget anything ever again. I became frustrated and haunted by what I couldn't remember. Even something as simple as forgetting my keys inside the house sent me in a bit of a downward spiral. I did what I could to help exercise that part of my brain so that I couldn't forget again. Over time, I learned to better handle the moments in which I couldn't remember something trivial. However, none of the therapy or brain exercises could help me deal with my grandpa, as his brain began to forget more and more. There were days when he would walk in the room and forget who I was. I imagined the pain I felt the first time he couldn't remember me must have been similar to the pain that him and my grandma felt when they had showed up to retrieve me from the hospital all those years back. I watched as the man who had helped me to fill in the blanks of my memory began to have holes in his own. Tirelessly, I worked to remind him, to help him. But that's what happens with Alzheimer's. Some days you can remember your whole life. Other days you can remember things you hadn't thought about in years. But most days it's hard to even remember the faces of the people who you see every day. He passed away not remembering who I was. And shortly after, my grandma passed away as well. I think the pain of being forgotten by someone who you spent all your heart loving just became too much. I was left alone for the first time, with no family to help me remember the things that I might forget. And with that, the fear eventually sank in. I had already forgotten so much of my life. I feared forgetting the rest that I had left to live. I wanted to remember it all, and started writing everything down. It started simple at first, taking notes on the backs of receipts of places I had visited, writing summaries on the backs of photos I would develop. Eventually, the fascination with my own memory turned into an obsession to never forget. I started bringing a notebook everywhere to write about the people and my experiences. It wasn't until recently that I realized how much of my time the writing began to consume. Eventually, I spent more time writing than actually living my life. I wanted to remember everything, from the placement of the objects on my desk, to the smell of the air, to the clothes I wore. I became obsessed with remembering every detail that I no longer knew how to live without writing out exactly what I was doing while I was doing it. It eventually kept me glued to the pen and notebook in my hand, writing, constantly writing. Much like I am doing now as I sit at my broken down desk from a garage sale I had stumbled upon a few years back. The watering stains beginning to pull up the sealant of the design on top. Much like the rings beginning to form now from my ice water sitting on the table next to me. I avoid pushing my hand or the notebook into the water as I continue to put these words into paper. Fear that the water with one small drop could cause the pages to wrinkle and the ink to bleed, ruining my work, as if the notebook in front of me was somehow tied to my own memory. I scribble and scribble my life away, afraid to eat, to drink, to move, for fear that I will miss something that I want so desperately to remember. I breathe. The air in my lungs is shaking as my body finds it harder and harder to push the air out of my chest. But as long as I am alive, I won't forget. That's why I continue to put these words on the paper, for fear that if I don't, one word will slip away, and one by one each word after will follow. Slipping away, but I won't forget. I can't forget because I'm writing it all down. Right here is words that I put onto paper. One after another, letter after letter, my brain moving faster than I can scribble, but I can't forget. I won't forget. So I continue to write these words onto paper so that I can remember, always reminding myself to never forget why I write these words onto paper, because I need the words so that I can remember to never forget. Never forget a single word that I write onto paper so that I can continue to remember to never ever forget to remember why I write these words onto paper. So that I never forget to remember why I write these words onto paper, so that I can never forget why I must remember to continue to write these words onto this paper, so that I never forget to never forget to never forget to never forget. And that is the end of that story. I got inspired to write this one a little bit back, but I didn't really know how I wanted to do it. This feels like one way to tackle it. I feel like there's something else I can still do with it, but I'm not sure yet. I write down everything in notebooks, every idea, because I know that my brain is easily forgetful. So I'm not afraid of a lot. I'll kill a spider, I'll sleep in the dark, but I am really scared of waking up one day and just not remembering anything. I'm afraid that I'm going to wake up one day and forget to work on the things that I wanted to work on for so long. That there was an idea somewhere that was worth remembering and I forgot it. I think this one for me is... It didn't really feel like a scary story when I was writing it, but it is something that I myself am really afraid of. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the story. And I'll be back next Sunday with something else. Stay spooky.